The moment the jet tilted sharply to the left and the cabin lights flickered out, everyone screamed. Oxygen masks dropped like white ghosts from the ceiling. Luggage crashed from the overhead bins, and in that split second of chaos, a man in the very last row did not panic. He stood up, bracing himself against the shaking aisle. As the aircraft lost altitude over open water and the pilot's strained voice announced an emergency landing, all this single dad could think about was the promise he'd made to his daughter that morning. "I will always come back to you." That promise is exactly why, when the jet hit the water hard and began filling with icy seawater, he ignored the screaming passengers pushing past him. He turned back toward the front of the plane, where he saw a woman trapped under a twisted metal panel, bleeding and disoriented. Everyone else ran right past her, because saving yourself is easier than saving someone else. But this man, Mark Evans, a warehouse worker and widowed father, did not run. He forced the panel up with raw adrenaline, shouting at her to grab onto him as water rushed in up to their waists. Together they fought their way toward the emergency exit just seconds before the cabin fully submerged. They surfaced into darkness, waves, and sirens, clinging to floating debris until rescue boats arrived. Only later, shivering on the rescue vessel, did Mark learn the truth about the woman he had dragged from the sinking jet. Her name was Claire Whitmore, a self-made billionaire CEO whose face was known on magazine covers. Her private assistants and security team were desperately searching for her. Yet in that moment, stripped of power and money, she had been nothing more than a terrified human being saved by a man who owned nothing but his integrity and the worn photos of his daughter in his wallet. After the medics checked them and reporters swarmed the dock, Mark quietly slipped away, catching a bus back to his small rented home. He never gave his name, never asked for thanks, because heroes don't always wait for recognition. They just go home and make dinner. That night, he tucked his daughter into bed without telling her how close he had come to never coming back. The next morning, as the sun barely rose, a deep engine hum echoed down his street. 3 black Cadillacs rolled to a stop in front of his house. His daughter pressed her face to the window, asking if they were in trouble. When Mark stepped outside, men in suits exited the cars, followed by Claire Whitmore herself. No makeup, no cameras, just gratitude in her eyes. She walked up to him and said, "You saved my life, and you didn't even tell anyone." Mark tried to wave it off, but Claire shook her head and replied, "Most people didn't." She explained how she'd asked investigators to track him down, how she learned about his 2 jobs, his overdue rent, his daughter's medical bills. She handed him a folder, not as charity, but as respect. A fully paid home, a trust for his daughter's education, and a job offer. The real gift, she said, was choice. As Mark's hands trembled, he realized that one brave decision had rewritten their future, not because of luck, but because character has a way of echoing back when you least expect it. For a long time, Mark believed that was where the story should end. A clean miracle with a grateful goodbye. But life has a way of testing blessings. 2 weeks later, Mark was called into a glass-walled conference room at his new job. Men from corporate security and legal sat across from him, sliding a tablet forward. It showed footage from the sinking jet, zoomed in on the exact moment he pulled Claire free. One of them asked in a measured voice whether he had spoken to the press, whether he understood the implications of being connected to the CEO during a federal investigation into the crash. Mark realized something terrifying. Saving a powerful person doesn't just bring gratitude. It brings scrutiny, suspicion, and enemies. The crash wasn't an accident. Maintenance corners had been cut, warnings ignored, and Claire's survival made her a liability to people who stood to lose billions. Suddenly, Mark was not just a single dad. He was a witness, a veritable, a problem. When he walked out of that room, his phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Heroes drown too, be careful." That night, he understood the truth no one tells you about courage. Sometimes the hardest part isn't pulling someone from the wreckage. It's surviving what comes after, when doing the right thing puts a target on your back. Mark didn't tell anyone about the message at first. Fear is loudest when you give it an audience. But it followed him anyway in the black sedan that idled too long outside his building, in the unfamiliar footsteps behind him on his walk home, in the sudden system error that locked him out of his company email. When he was called in again and politely informed his position was being restructured, he understood the warning had teeth. This wasn't about gratitude anymore. It was about control. That night, his daughter asked why he looked so tired. Mark realized the choice he'd made on that sinking jet had only just begun. When Claire finally called, her voice tight with anger and apology, she explained that people inside her own company were trying to silence witnesses. She offered to relocate him quietly, to make the problem disappear. Mark surprised himself by saying no. He had spent his whole life watching people like him bend, step aside, and stay small. He would not teach his daughter that safety was worth more than truth. The next morning, when investigators came knocking, Mark told them everything about the shortcuts he overheard, the questions from security, the threat on his phone. The fallout was immediate. Media vans, angry shareholders, executives placed on leave. Mark stood at a podium, shaking but unflinching. He also saw something new. Claire standing beside him, not as a billionaire protected by walls, but as a woman choosing accountability over comfort. The story broke nationwide, but people didn't just talk about a crash or a sea. They talked about a single dad who refused to disappear. Some rescues don't pull you out of the water. They pull you into who you were always meant to be. The storm didn't end with the headlines. Months later, when the investigations concluded and arrests were quietly made, Mark's life didn't suddenly turn easy. It simply became honest again. Claire kept her word, not with more money, but with distance, stepping down to rebuild her company's integrity. Mark found work with a nonprofit focused on aviation safety. He knew firsthand what happens when voices are ignored. Nearly a year after the crash, Mark took his daughter to the ocean. She laughed as the waves rolled in, unafraid. She asked him why he went back into the plane when everyone else was running away. He didn't talk about bravery or destiny. He just said, because someone needed help, and I was there. He understood then that his daughter would grow up knowing that doing the right thing doesn't always protect you or reward you quickly, but it always leaves you with yourself. As the sun dipped below the horizon, he felt something rare and quiet settle in his chest. Peace. The kind that comes when you survive the worst moment of your life twice and still choose to stand upright. Because some stories don't end with applause or wealth. They end with a man walking home, holding his child's hand, knowing that even when the world tilts and starts to sink, who you are is the only thing that keeps you afloat. Thanks for watching.